All right, let's jump right into today's deep dive. We're going straight to India today. We've got a whole stack of news headlines, all from February 22nd, 2025. And it's a pretty wild mix, I got to say. We've got business, politics, entertainment, even some sports. It's going to be a real roller coaster. So, yeah, basically, consider this your all-access pass to what's happening in India right now.
It's fascinating how these headlines, when you first look at them, they seem completely random. But then when you start digging in, you see how they're all connected. They paint this bigger picture of what's going on in India right now, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, some of these headlines are pretty juicy. We've got a Bollywood film that's absolutely crushing it at the box office. We've got a former U.S. president stirring up controversy, and even a potential opioid crisis that's spreading across continents. It's a lot to unpack.
There are some serious questions that come up too, like about corporate responsibility, international relations, and even the social and economic fabric of India.
Okay, so let's dive right into this news pile. I guess maybe starting with one that's pretty alarming, to be honest. There's this BBC expose that just dropped, and it says that Avio Pharmaceuticals, which is an Indian company, is allegedly exporting these unlicensed and incredibly addictive opioids to West Africa, and it's causing a major public health crisis over there.
The really worrying thing here is how this could even happen in the first place. You know, the BBC's investigation was super thorough. They trace these opioids all the way back to Avio's factory in Mumbai. They even got a recording of one of the company's directors talking about how dangerous the drug is, but at the same time, he's pushing for more sales.
Wow.
It's just a clear case of putting profits before people's lives.
It's really disturbing to think about, and it makes you wonder, like, how often does this kind of thing happen? You know, with other companies and other products. And the impact of this particular case is already so devastating. These opioids are being packaged in a way that makes them look like a regular medicine, which is just incredibly deceptive. And they're leading to all sorts of horrible health problems, like breathing difficulties, seizures, even fatal overdoses.
And this isn't a small-scale thing. Either Nigeria's become the biggest market for these opioids, but you can find them on the streets in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, too. There are groups trying to fight back. Like, there's this volunteer task force in Ghana that's trying to do damage control, but it's an uphill battle, for sure.
And here's where things get even more complicated. Indian authorities are saying that they have really strict rules about exporting pharmaceuticals. But clearly, these drugs are still getting out of the country somehow.
Right.
So what does this mean for Avio? Could this whole scandal force India to rethink how it regulates its pharmaceutical industry?
Those are the million-dollar questions. Avio could be facing some serious legal trouble, both in India and internationally. This scandal has gotten a lot of global attention, and it could put pressure on India to really take a hard look at its regulations, and it really underscores the need for better oversight and enforcement, not just in India, but around the world, making sure that companies are acting ethically.
Absolutely. This whole situation is a huge wake-up call, you know? Corporate responsibility shouldn't just be empty words. It has to mean something. Okay, switching gears now to a different kind of crisis. This one's hitting India's financial system pretty hard. It's a major liquidity crunch.
Yeah, and to try to deal with this, the Reserve Bank of India, or RBI, has taken a pretty drastic step. They've announced a $10 billion rupee swap auction. Basically, this is supposed to inject more rupees into the banking system.
Okay, now for those of us who don't have a PhD in finance, can you explain what a swap auction is and why this is such a big move?
Sure. So basically, it's kind of like a temporary trade. The RBI offers dollars to banks, and in exchange, the banks give the RBI rupees. This boosts the amount of rupees that are circulating in the market, which should ease the liquidity crunch and hopefully stabilize the whole system.
So it's a bit like a financial band-aid, like a quick fix for a problem that needs immediate attention.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, but it's important to remember that this isn't the first time the RBI has done this. They already did a smaller swap a while back, but the problem didn't go away. This larger 3-year swap suggests that the RBI is trying to take a longer-term approach this time, realizing that a quick fix might not be enough.
And this liquidity crisis could have a big impact on the entire Indian economy. What kind of ripple effects could we see on things like interest rates, bond yields, and just the overall stability of the market?
That's the big question, isn't it? The impact is going to depend on a lot of different factors, but it's something we definitely need to keep an eye on. This situation just shows how interconnected the global financial system is. What happens in one part of the world can definitely affect other parts, as I'm sure our listener knows.
Oh, absolutely, especially in today's world. Okay, buckle up because we're heading into the world of politics now. Former U.S. President Donald Trump just dropped a bombshell. He's claiming that the U.S. spent a whopping $21 million trying to influence India's elections.
Yeah, his claim is focused on efforts to increase voter turnout in India. And that's interesting thing is how this all came out. It was Elon Musk, who's now in charge of this U.S. government department that's focused on cutting spending. He was the one who canceled this particular payment.
So it's a bit of a tangled web, huh? And it's definitely stirred up a lot of controversy in India. The BJP, which is the current ruling party, is pointing the finger at the Congress Party, accusing them of being involved in this alleged foreign interference.
And of course, the Congress Party is denying any involvement, saying Trump claims are completely baseless. But this situation does raise some interesting questions, like about how trustworthy Trump is about the U.S. aid program and what this could mean for the relationship between the U.S. and India.
And let's not forget about Elon Musk's role in all of this. The fact that he's involved in cutting U.S. foreign aid just adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating mix of international politics, domestic power struggles, and the growing influence of figures like Elon Musk. These kinds of events can really shake people's faith in government institutions, both at home and abroad.
You're absolutely right. Okay, let's take a break from all this serious stuff for a minute and step into the glamorous world of Bollywood. Chhaava just broke all kinds of box office records. It's India's first blockbuster of 2025.
It's a huge win for Bollywood, especially after a pretty slow start to the year. The film's already made over 300 crore globally, with 228.69 crore of that coming from India alone.
Those are some seriously impressive numbers. It's beating every other Hindi film that's come out this year. Everyone seems to be talking about it. So what does this kind of success tell us about the state of Bollywood and its impact on culture?
Well, Chhaava could be a sign that Bollywood is making a comeback after some uncertain times, you know? Its success also makes you think about what audiences are really connecting with these days. What are the themes and stories that are resonating with people both in India and around the world?
It's a great question. It reminds us of how powerful storytelling can be. It has the power to cross borders and connect with people on a really human level. Okay, let's switch gears again and head over to the cricket pitch. There's a legendary cricketer who's raising some concerns about one of India's biggest stars, Virat Kohli.
Right. Sunil Gavaskar, a name that pretty much everyone in India knows, has said he's worried about Kohli's weakness against spin bowling, especially left-arm spin. This concern is coming from a trend we've been seeing in recent matches.
Now, I know not everyone listening might be a cricket expert, so just to be clear, Virat Kohli is a huge deal. Think of him as like India's LeBron James or Tom Brady. He's a total sporting icon. So when his performance dips, even a little, it's big news. What exactly has Gavaskar noticed about Kohli's technique that's making him worried?
Well, Gavaskar has pointed out a possible flaw in the way Kohli positions his bat when he's facing spin. It's a technical thing that, if he doesn't fix it, could keep causing him problems in future matches. This is the kind of deep analysis that makes Gavaskar such a respected voice in the sport.
It just goes to show that even the best athletes in the world have areas where they can improve. Okay, back to the world of politics now. Rahul Gandhi, the leader of the Congress Party, has just come out with a pretty harsh critique of the BJP government in Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah, Gandhi didn't hold back at all. He called them a failed government, a double-engine regime with no engine. He was particularly critical of their handling of inflation and unemployment, issues that are really affecting people's lives.
It's a pretty strong statement, and it seems like Gandhi is trying to draw a clear contrast between how the BJP is doing in Uttar Pradesh and what he sees as the Congress Party's much better performance in states like Telangana and Karnataka.
Absolutely. He's definitely positioning the Congress Party as the better choice, especially with elections coming up. But it's important to remember that the Congress Party has its own problems and critics. Whether voters will buy into their message remains to be seen.
Good point. It makes you wonder if voters will really believe the Congress Party's story or just see it as a political move. And speaking of political moves, the Congress Party has also made some pretty explosive accusations. They're claiming that the BJP and RSS have been getting money from America since the 1960s.
These are serious accusations, suggesting that this funding was meant to weaken Congress governments. They even mentioned a supposed assassination plot against a Congress leader.
Wow. If that's true, those are some heavy allegations that touch on a really complicated history of U.S. involvement in Indian politics. It definitely adds a whole other dimension to the current political landscape.
It does, and it also raises questions about how true these accusations are and what the motives behind them might be. It's important to think about who's saying this and what their biases might be.
Right. We always have to remember that information can be twisted to fit certain agendas. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's deeply connected to India's cultural identity. Language Prime Minister Modi has been talking a lot about how important it is to embrace all of India's languages, not seeing anyone as better or worse than another.
It's an interesting thing for him to say, especially considering all the debate and tension around language in India. You know, we've seen how controversial the three-language formula in education has been, with states like Tamil Nadu pushing back hard against what they see as Hindi being forced on them.
Right, and Modi's message seems to be all about unity and diversity. He's saying that Indian languages have always learned from each other, that they've existed together and created this rich cultural tapestry. He sees them as something that should bring people together, not divide them.
It's a call for inclusivity, for celebrating all the different languages that make up Indian culture, but actually putting that into practice in the middle of all the political arguments about language is a tough challenge.
Absolutely, finding real linguistic harmony takes a lot of understanding, sensitivity, and a genuine effort to bridge the gaps between people. Speaking of bridging gaps, let's take a look at a situation where those gaps seem to be getting wider. India recently had a bit of a diplomatic clash with Turkey, and it was all about Kashmir.
Yeah, during a trip to Pakistan, Turkish President Erdogan said some things about Kashmir that really didn't go over well in India. He talked about the need for a UN resolution to address the issue, emphasizing dialogue and respecting what the people of Kashmir want. But this really struck a nerve in India because the government sees Jammu and Kashmir as part of India, plain and simple, and they don't want any outside interference.
So Erdogan basically steps right into this incredibly sensitive and complicated political situation, a situation that's been causing tension between India and Pakistan for decades.
Exactly. And India didn't waste any time responding. They said Erdogan's remarks were totally unacceptable and made a formal complaint to Turkey. This whole thing shows just how sensitive the Kashmir issue is for India and how any perceived threat to their control over the region is going to trigger a strong reaction.
It reminds us that even though the world is supposed to be getting more connected, old conflicts and geopolitical interests can still easily cause friction between countries. It also makes you wonder, how is this going to affect the relationship between India and Turkey going forward?
That's a good question. This whole diplomatic mess could have some long-term consequences. It could hurt trade relations and strategic partnerships. It also highlights the tricky situation India is in trying to navigate a world with multiple power centers. They have to manage these complicated relationships with countries that don't always see eye to eye with them.
It's a real balancing act, that's for sure. Okay, let's shift our focus to an issue that's affecting both the environment and the economy in India: the impact of air pollution on the cost of health insurance.
This is a growing problem, especially in cities like New Delhi, where the air pollution is just terrible. Insurers are now doing something they've never done before. They're planning to raise health insurance premiums by 10 to 15%. This is all because of a big increase in claims related to breathing problems and heart conditions, both of which are directly linked to being exposed to bad air for long periods.
That's a huge increase, and it's worrying because it means healthcare could become even less affordable for people who already struggle to pay for it. It also shows how pollution is putting a financial strain on individuals, families, and the entire healthcare system.
Absolutely. This situation just shows how environmental problems can have consequences that reach far beyond just our physical health. It affects our wallets, too. It's a clear reminder that ignoring environmental issues can have a huge cost, both in terms of human suffering and economic loss.
It's a wake-up call, urging us to think about the long-term consequences of our actions and prioritize sustainable practices. Okay, to wrap things up, let's go back to that debate we touched on earlier about Zomato and geofinancial services being added to the Nifty 50 index.
Right. A lot of people are unhappy about this decision. They're questioning whether these companies actually deserve to be in the index. They argue that including companies that are losing money or don't have a long history of success could mess up the index's value and create a misleading picture of how healthy the market really is.
So basically, it's a debate about what should determine which companies get into the Nifty 50. Should they change the rules to reflect the changing market, or should they stick with the traditional ways of measuring financial performance?
Exactly. And it's a debate that raises important questions about transparency, fairness, and how innovation is shaping the financial world. Should companies that are shaking things up in traditional industries, even if they're not making a profit yet, be given a place at the table? Or should the focus stay on the established players with proven track records?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer.
It's a question that matters not just in India, but in financial markets all over the world. As technology keeps changing industries and new ways of doing business emerge, the way we measure success and determine value is constantly evolving.
It reminds us that we're living in a time of rapid change, and our understanding of finance needs to keep up with those changes.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed and really think critically about the information we're getting. Yeah, that's so important these days. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but you got to think for yourself, do your own research. But hey, speaking of digging deeper, there's another story we should unpack. Remember those accusations the Congress Party made about the BJP getting funding from America? Well, there are some interesting historical parallels there that are worth exploring.
Oh yeah, definitely. What kind of parallels are we talking about?
Well, these accusations from Congress saying that American money was used to destabilize their governments, they point to things like alleged assassination plots and funding protests to undermine the previous UPA government. If these claims are true, it kind of suggests a pattern of foreign interference in India's internal affairs.
That's a pretty serious accusation. If they could actually prove these claims, it would paint a pretty disturbing picture of what's been going on behind the scenes. It would raise some big questions about how fair and democratic things really are.
Right. It adds a whole new dimension to this whole debate about outside influence on Indian politics. It makes you wonder, how long has this been going on? What are they trying to achieve? And how is it affecting what's happening in Indian politics today?
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer reveals something even more complicated. And it also makes you think, what does all this mean for the relationship between the U.S. and India right now?
That's a crucial question. If these accusations turn out to be true, it could really damage the relationship between the two countries, create distrust and tension. It would also play into those existing fears in India about foreign powers meddling in their affairs. The consequences could be pretty serious.
And we can't forget about how the Indian public is going to react to all of this. How will these allegations affect their trust in the government and the whole political process?
Those are important questions, and they really highlight why transparency and accountability are so crucial in government. People need to feel like their leaders are working for them, not being controlled by foreign powers.
Absolutely, this whole situation really shows how fragile trust can be in politics. Okay, let's step away from all this political drama for a bit and focus on something a little more unifying. Prime Minister Modi has been really emphasizing the importance of embracing all of India's languages. He's saying that we shouldn't see any hierarchy or division between them.
It's a powerful message, especially considering all the debate and sensitivity surrounding language in India. We've seen how much tension there's been around the three-language formula in education, with states like Tamil Nadu really pushing back against what they see as an attempt to impose Hindi on them.
And that's what makes Modi's message so interesting, right? He's basically saying, look, our languages have always enriched each other. They've coexisted and helped to create this incredibly diverse and vibrant culture. We should see them as something that brings us together, not something that divides us.
It's a call for inclusivity, for celebrating all the linguistic richness that makes India so unique. But actually putting that into action, considering how complicated language politics are in India, is a huge challenge.
Totally. Finding real harmony between languages takes a lot of understanding, sensitivity, and a genuine willingness to bridge the divides between people. Speaking of bridging divides, let's take a look at a situation where those divides seem to be widening India. And Turkey recently had a bit of a diplomatic spat over the Kashmir issue, and things got a little heated.
Yeah, during a visit to Pakistan, Turkish President Erdogan made some comments about Kashmir that India was not happy about at all. He suggested that the UN should step in and find a resolution, advocating for dialogue and respect for what the Kashmiri people want. Of course, this touched a nerve in India. The Indian government sees Jammu and Kashmir as an integral part of their country, and they don't want anyone else getting involved.
So Erdogan basically stepped right into this incredibly sensitive and messy geopolitical situation, a situation that's been a source of tension between India and Pakistan for decades.
Exactly. And India's response was quick and strong. They condemned Erdogan's remarks, calling them unacceptable, and they lodged a formal protest with Turkey. This whole incident just shows how deeply the Kashmir issue is embedded in India's national identity and how any perceived challenge to their authority over the region is going to provoke a strong reaction.
It's a reminder that even though we live in a world that's supposed to be increasingly interconnected, historical baggage, territorial disputes, and geopolitical ambitions can still flare up and cause conflict between nations. It also makes you wonder, what impact is this going to have on the relationship between India and Turkey moving forward?
That's a really good question. This diplomatic row could have some lasting consequences. It could damage trade relationships and strategic partnerships. It also highlights the difficult balancing act India has to perform in this multipolar world. They need to manage these complex relationships with countries that don't always align with their interests.
It's a tough balancing act, that's for sure. Okay, let's turn our attention to a very real and urgent issue that's affecting both the environment and the economy in India: the impacts of air pollution on the cost of health insurance.
This is becoming a major concern, especially in big cities like New Delhi, where the air quality is just horrendous. Insurers are now taking some pretty drastic measures. They're planning to increase health insurance premiums by 10 to 15%. This decision is a direct result of the sharp rise in claims for respiratory and cardiovascular illnesses, both of which are linked to long-term exposure to polluted air.
That's a huge jump in cost, and it's worrying because it means that healthcare could become even more unaffordable for a lot of people. It also highlights the economic burden that pollution is placing on individuals, families, and the healthcare system as a whole.
No doubt about it. This situation really underlines how environmental problems can have far-reaching consequences. They don't just affect our physical health, they hit our wallets too. It's a stark reminder that ignoring environmental problems can come with a hefty price tag, both in terms of human suffering and economic loss.
It's definitely a wake-up call. It's a call to action, urging us to think about the long-term consequences of our choices and to start prioritizing sustainable practices. Okay, to wrap things up, let's go back to that debate we were discussing earlier about Zomato and Geo Financial Services being included in the prestigious Nifty 50 index.
Right, that decision has caused quite a stir, hasn't it? A lot of people are questioning whether these companies really deserve to be part of the index. They argue that including companies that are currently operating at a loss or that don't have a long and established track record could distort the index's valuation and create a misleading picture of how healthy the market really is.
So essentially, it boils down to a debate about what criteria should be used to decide which companies get into the Nifty 50. Should those criteria be updated to reflect the changing dynamics of the market, or should they stick with the traditional measures of financial performance?
Exactly. That's the crux of the matter. And it raises some really important questions about transparency, fairness, and the role of innovation in shaping the financial landscape. Should companies that are disrupting traditional industries, even if they're not yet profitable, be given a seat at the table? Or should the focus remain on established players with a proven track record?
It's a complicated question with no easy answers.
It's a question that's relevant not just in India, but in financial markets all around the world. As technology keeps disrupting industries and new business models emerge, the way we define success and measure value is constantly changing.
It's a reminder that we're living in a time of really rapid change, and our understanding of the financial world needs to revolve along with it.
Absolutely, and that's why staying informed and thinking critically about the information we receive is more important than ever.
Yeah, it's a whole new ballgame out there, huh? But before we get too deep into the world of finance, I want to go back to something a little more grounded, something that hits closer to home. You know those insurance premiums we talked about? The ones that are going up because of pollution? That story really got me thinking about how everything's connected.
I know what you mean. It's easy to get caught up in the daily headlines, but sometimes you got to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. How are all these seemingly separate events related? How do they affect each other? And what does it all mean for the average person living in India today?
Exactly. We've talked about a potential opioid crisis driven by corporate greed, a liquidity crunch shaking up the financial system, and a political landscape full of accusations and power struggles. And then there's pollution, hitting people right where it hurts their bank accounts. It's like all these different threads are weaving together to create this complicated tapestry of challenges and opportunities.
A tapestry that reflects just how dynamic and resilient India is. It's a nation facing some serious issues, but it's also searching for solutions and constantly adapting.
It's a good reminder that we can't just look at these issues in isolation. They're all interconnected, and understanding one issue often helps us understand the others.
Like, take that debate about the Nifty 50, for example. Some people might see it as just a financial thing, but it also reflects those larger societal changes that are happening, the rise of new technologies, and the way economic power is shifting.
It's all connected, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about understanding individual events. It's about grasping the bigger picture they create.
And that picture is always changing. What we've discussed today is just a snapshot, a glimpse into what's shaping India right now.
Yeah, it's like we've put together a puzzle, but there are always more pieces to find, more connections to make. And that, I think, is what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely. It keeps us curious, keeps us learning, keeps us asking questions.
And that's what we want you, our listeners, to do. As we wrap up this deep dive into India's news, we want to leave you with a thought. Of all the headlines we talked about today, which one stood out to you the most? Which one sparked your curiosity and made you want to learn more?
That's the spark we're hoping to ignite, a desire to dig deeper, to go beyond the headlines and really engage with the complex issues facing our world.
Because that's where real understanding comes from, the connections we make, the questions we ask, and the journey of continuous learning.
So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.